Good morning to all. Don't wait for someone to bring your flowers. Plant your own garden and decorate your own soul. I deem it a great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Harini Santhanam, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Public Policy, MAHE, that is Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Bangalore, the resource person for today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Harini Santhanam, for joining us today amidst your busy schedule. I'm extremely happy to welcome Dr. M. Palanisamy, Scientist, E, Botanical Survey of India, Central National Herbarium, Howrah, Kolkata, for today's function. I'm extremely happy to welcome Dr. J. Joel Yanadas, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology, Loyola College, to today's event. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I am equally happy to welcome Dr. Joni Virgula, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Physics, Ethiraj College for Women, for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Joni. I am extremely happy to welcome Dr. Lakshmi, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology, Self-Supporting Stream, STNB Vaishnav College, Rompet, who is also the alumna of Ethiraj College for Women, for today's event. Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi, for joining us. And my hearty welcome to all the participants from different parts of India, especially from Bihar, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu Kashmir, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and West Bengal. Welcome, dear participants, to Ethiraj College for Women and Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology. I extend a cordial welcome to all my dear colleagues who are the pillar of strength in all the department activities. And I also extend my welcome to my lab assistants to this program. Finally, I give my warm welcome to all my dear students, the fragrant flowers of the Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology, who always add colors, fragrance, and success to all department activities. Happy welcome to one and all. It's my pleasant duty to introduce Dr. Harini Santhanam, the resource person of today's national webinar, to the participants. Dr. Harini Santhanam, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Public Policy, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Bangalore. She is an environmental scientist and a sustainability researcher with a special emphasis on evidence-based policy research. She has been associated with the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, India, since 2019 with the Energy, Environment, and Climate Change Program, where she conducted interdisciplinary research on the science and policy perspectives associated with land, water, air quality, vulnerability assessment, and policy gaps. Dr. Harini was a long-term postdoctoral associate with Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where she had worked in multidisciplinary teams associated with the assessment of water quality, geochemistry, and development of lake environmental indices. These valuable experiences bring forth important perspectives to identify and analyze critical gaps in the socio-geological and environmental quality research in India. She has been involved in integrating domain-specific scientific analysis with policy perspectives, creating a framework for socio-technological constraints assessment and technology policy analysis, etc. She uses problem-based approaches to analyze critical gaps in socio-ecological research. Her areas of interest include research on ecosystem services assessment, policy enhancement for positive land, water, human nexus, methodologies for building ecosystem and climate resilience, and the use of data-based policies as levers for sustainable development. She has been the recipient of AICTE National Doctoral Fellowship, MOAS Postdoctoral Fellowship, and DST Women Scientist Fellowship, and has considerable experience in leading research teams in India. She is also recognized as an expert with IGNOU University and provides online lectures for PG, diploma, and master courses in sustainability science. Recently, she has authored a book titled Blue Green Infrastructure across South Asian countries, published by Springer Publishers Singapore. She has many research awards to her credit for her academic and research achievements, and she has authored over 50 international journal papers, book chapters, and conference papers. Dr. Harani Santhanam, the Ethiraj College for Women and the Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology is extremely happy to welcome you to this national webinar. Now over to Dr. Harini Santhanam. Thank you, Dr. Harini Santhanam, for accepting our invitation amidst your busy schedule. Over to Dr. Harini Santhanam for accepting our invitation amidst your busy schedule. Over to Dr. Harini Santhanam.
Thank you, Professor Manimari. It's a pleasure to be here amongst Ethiraj College students and other experts. And it's a very august occasion for me to present some of the work that I've been doing over the past few years in front of you all here today. So I'll just begin to share my presentation with you. I hope this is visible. Okay.
Yes, visible.
Okay. So let me begin. The title for my talk today is Science Policy Integration to Build Climate Resilient Coasts. So a very important topic I feel is how to connect science with policy, and it is something that is not usually discussed very easily amongst even the science fraternity and the social scientists themselves. They feel that it is more of scientific things, not why I should discuss policy aspects. So I thought, as a person who is trying to work out on both sides of the coin, I thought to bring this forth and tell you how important it is for scientists to consider science policy integration. So the today's talk, if you see, we will be talking more of science, obviously, but more about climate, oceans, coasts, and technology. But what is at core is the society. So society drives technology, which again drives the society. And there is a science behind all the aspects that governs the science and technology of a society. So let us see, beginning with our talk, we can understand what ails our marine environment first of all. Okay, so there are many aspects to it. It is not like we don't know about any of these. We are very well aware, for example, of what are known as GHGs or greenhouse gases, which may be emitted from all types of environment. But what makes the marine environment very sensitive to it is that we say that the marine environments and the oceans can absorb as much as 30 to 50% of the global CO2. And CO2, as you know, is a very major form of carbon dioxide, a major form of greenhouse gas. And if the oceans can absorb 30 to 50%, what is the problem? Okay, so why are marine scientists talking so much about developing coastal zones, coastal areas? Why is it so important? And that's because if you see the graph on your left hand side, there are so many other issues which connect to the way in which the greenhouse gases are emitted from the marine environments. Also, if we see the international reports, the IPBES report on sustainable use assessment, it pushes for the policymakers to ensure that fisheries, among other sectors, need to become more sustainable. So there we start with the idea that there is something that has to be made sustainable with the fishing sector. And overfishing is one activity which is very rampant and which is not very recognized, because the transformative efforts are required to assure those changes which will make this sector sustainable. That is one consideration. Now, if we go to another important report, which is the State of the Ocean report, which was released during the United Nations Ocean Conference in July 2022, UNESCO said in this report that the review of the current status of the ocean was very critical, so that we should encourage the global conservational efforts at societal levels and control the ongoing rampant degradation. See, this is a very important factor, because what UNESCO said was not confined to only the animal aspects of the marine environment, which actually comes to the mind whenever we talk about it, because that is what is more economically significant. What fishes, what is the produce, what is the yield, that is most important. But this conferences, such conferences which deal with the decade of oceans, right? This decade, the period from 2020 to 2030 is designated as a UN decade of oceans. This is also the UN decade of restoration. So the idea or the focus of the highlight is on those ecosystems as a whole, where plants, animals, the biota, human beings, everybody together are very important if we look not only at the sustainability aspect, but also at conservational aspect. And UNFCCC, which deals with land degradation. So that is another interesting thing which came out of the COP that happened at UNFCCC, which dealt with the creation of loss and damage funds. So it is not enough if we just look at the science scientific aspects of things. What was important is that there was a fund which needs to be created. That's what they put forth very, very, powerfully, I should say, because those perspectives of climate financing are very relevant in the present climate change scenario. And all the decadal growths, be it the sustainable development goals you may be aware of, or the land degradation neutrality goals. There is one goal called 30 by 30 or the Kumning Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. All these, the One Health Agenda, all these actually focus on very one important aspect of ecosystem restoration and ecosystem sustainability initiatives. So here you see the idea how climate scenarios will influence human development is inbuilt, or the core aspect of each of these different issues that we see here. And that is why that 30 to 50% of sequestration of CO2 by the global oceans is not enough for us to guarantee that all the environment and all the ecosystems are flourishing and they are actually healthy. So let us now look at the next, the concern that we are having here. I'm going to take you through one of India's very recent initiative, which is the COP26, or the Glasgow Initiative, leading to what is known as India's G20 initiative. Now, India, as you know, it has taken the presidency of this G20 summit, and what is styled for us as scientists, as ecologists, as environmentalists, is to look closely at this term called lifestyle for the environment. Okay, so the mission of this G20 initiative is to win the support of international community and those who live in India, and actually allow them or tell them and also create awareness, as also build measures to follow a healthy green lifestyle in India as well as abroad. So the global mantra here is focusing on what is known as climate change, and by blending the spiritual ideal of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, which means you can see on the right hand side, one earth, one family, one future, which is a very strong narrative to drive green transformation. So the motto actually encapsulates the essence of pro-life of planet and people together, along with the very important aspect, the ecosystems. So actually green markets, which are the basis for development, also have to consider now the green ecosystems, right? So that has become what is the very important aspect of how we can actually look at ecosystems. But we know that ecosystems become degraded over time for many reasons. And one such aspect are the anthropogenic effects, which actually are outdating, what we think of as, the more important aspect today talked about is climate change. Anthropogenic pressures as pollution or other pressures that we talked about earlier are still in the background, but they are not going away. So our aspect now is to not just look on the climate change aspects, also consider the anthropogenic aspects, because we want our ecosystems to become what is known as resilient. Resilience, as you all know, if somebody comes to hit us, we try to defend ourselves or hit back. So we are actually trying to become resilient to what attack the other person is putting on us. But for the ecosystem perspective, if you see, ecosystems are getting attacked in different ways. And those two ways I just mentioned, the anthropogenic pressures as well as the climate change pressures, they also are happening at the same time when the ecosystems have to undergo natural pressures through natural disasters. So for an ecosystem to become resilient, it has to tackle multiple challenges. And as human beings, when we look at how we can make our ecosystems resilient, there are two ways. One way is to enhance or increase the natural ability to recover from a disturbance or a disaster. And the second way is to increase opportunities for recovering the functions through engineering methods. So these are two important ways in which Presently, the world is looking at making ecosystems resilient. There are two important other ways which have the most long-term impacts, and that is first to decrease human-based activities that cause pollution, and second is to decrease the human exploitation of the ecosystems. A lot of us have come across the term called value of ecosystem. There are some of us who have understood the concept of ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are the services that ecosystems give to humankind. And this becomes the focus where we say whatever is the loss of the value of the ecosystem or the loss of functions of the ecosystem, they are actually translated as loss of ecosystem services itself. When we think of this, we have to think about the concern that now we have to make our ecosystem safe. So beginning with environmental safety as a core concept, I again reiterate the two ways in which this can be dealt with. One way is called the technogenic concept. And the technogenic concept says the combination of environment with economic growth and natural growth of the population should be considered while we are rationing what is admissible pollution of the various environments. So now the concept here now we are building on is that pollution is unavoidable. Whatever activities that human beings do will decrease the value of the ecosystem and hamper its ecosystem services, because there is always going to be some level of environmental pollution. But where is the admissible level? To determine that, we need to have some technology in place. Technologies are also required to maintain strict clearing systems which will not further degrade the environment. And the third way is to create assets or create resource saving technologies. So this is a technogenic concept of how we deal with ecosystem resilience. There is a biogenic concept which is far more important and far at the core of how humans and ecosystems must deal with each other, and that is to define the ecosystem load, define the thresholds of stability of ecosystems, as well as their biodiversity. Now, if you see, there is a very specific population which can actively contribute to this biogenic concept, and that is the biologists, the population of biologists themselves. They are the people who can say, we can use methods for biodiversity assessment, say, we determine species composition, and through integrated indicators, we can say that this part of the world is ecologically safe or environmentally safe. For somebody to say that, we really have to determine the biodiversity, and we really have to have a count of how this will actually help us to assess how much we are degrading an ecosystem and how resilient it can become, because these factors that you see with the biogenic concept, they are the most complex factors in operation. So when we move next, we see there can be only no one solution that we can give for developing resilience. It has to be a combination. Now let us take the example of fishing as we saw first. Now here, adaptive co-management, that is the keyword that is set, because everybody needs food and fishes actually fulfill the nutritional requirements of both the rich and the poor and across all strata of the society. So if we consider that as a very most economic activity, we are also pretty certain that this activity is going to spoil the environment. So how can we deal with this? So the strategy that comes into operation is called adaptive co-management, where the cooperation of fishers, the coordination with different communities, and the concentrated efforts of policymakers with the assistance of scientists who actually bring in the biogenic concepts and say what are the correctional trends that have to be applied, so that the technogenic concept that we saw of creating conditional assets which are utilizable by across all communities come into existence and focus. So now at present, let us take three important cases for a discussion. Now we actually now go back again to the question of climate change, because climate is one factor that is going to affect all the types of adaptive co-management approaches that one might take. So now let us see three factors: overfishing, biodiversity loss, and coastal land degradation. I am not dealing with others because others are well explained, but climate change itself being at the core of all this, we will actually take this forward under taking the example of seagrasses. Another example will be taking coastal land degradation impacts into consideration. And the third will be to recognize the true value of biodiversity losses. So let us move forward with seagrasses and climatic change. We have to ask ourselves, as botanists, I think it's very, very interesting to all of you to understand a concept of the domain of plant kingdom, which is not very well discussed most of the times when we talk about how sequestration of CO2 occurs, because there are lots of research that is required to be taken forth in the domain of seagrass studies. So I am taking the example today to let us analyze how they play a pivotal role in maintaining the sustainability from the aquatic ecosystems domain. We all are very well aware of grasslands. We are well aware of the roles of other plants and trees and animals on land or terrestrial fragments. But of the aquatic ecosystems, very less is known. What do we know? We know that seagrass species have very low global diversity, right? There are only 60 or less than 60 species globally, which makes them very, very special. And their ranges extend for thousands of kilometers across all coastlines. But they are also actually not very well flourishing in most of the coastlines. There are 6 global bioregions, of which 4 are temperate and 2 are tropical areas where their existence is very well marked. And the temperate bioregions include the North Atlantic, the North Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Southern Ocean. And the tropical bioregions include the tropical Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific, where the highest biodiversity is recorded. So what about India? If we look at India, there are 6 genera and 13 species which are present in India, and those are concentrated in the Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay regions, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and Lakshadweep Islands. Some of these environments are shown here. It's very interesting because I think the Botanical Survey of India has very dedicated volumes which talk about the Indian seagrass system, and they are beautifully described in the literature, which are not easily available for outside. I know there is an expert here from BSI, and I'm very happy, sir, to tell you that my source of information are the BSI reports. To understand how they impact the sustainability aspects, I actually look at how SDGs correlate with seagrasses, right? SDGs, as you know, are a set of 17 global goals, which were given by the United Nations, and they were functional since 2015. And there are several targets that each of these SDG goals actually promote to enhance the overall sustainability of life. And SDG 14, if you see, life below water, is very specific to the marine and coastal environments. You see, at the very core of this seagrass ecosystems can be found. On your left hand side, you can see how important they are because of the diverse ecosystem services operations that they offer. They actually support sustainable fisheries. They actually indicate what are the sustainable fish stocks that can be generated in a specific ecosystem. They actually are also indicators of marine acidity. They help to increase the coverage of the protected areas in a marine environment. And as per the conservation efforts, they can actually help in reducing unregulated fishing. These indicate also the anthropogenic effect on the ecosystems because they are very sensitive ecosystems. And through their following them, through the use of marine technology, we actually come up with better policies which actually indicate the need to institutionalize their global protection. This is one very important aspect. And why from a very hyper local level, if you see, they are actually contributing to the socioeconomics of the region where they are present. Prawns, for example, have to spend some of their life cycle on seagrass ecosystems. Now, here is where the power of transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research become very, very important to understand how seagrass ecosystems actually contribute not only the economy but also sequestration of, you can see here, up to 1.33 metric tons of carbon per hectare per year. And this is a very large number, because we are not now saying, yes, there is some sequestration that's happening in the marine environment, but we are telling seagrasses contribute a lot to about this total carbon storage in the ocean for about 15%. And mind you, these are long-term carbon barriers to the tune of 83 gigacarbon per meter square per year, and this translates to a very high carbon storage levels. So from here, if we see what happens, especially when humans connect with this seagrass ecosystem, mostly we actually cause the dying away because of overfishing activities. Now, when they are alive, they play very pivotal roles in the marine carbon cycles, which we will discuss a little later. They also very importantly contribute to sequestration of carbon dioxide and store it underground as blue carbon. They are also nursery grounds for juveniles, and they increase the landed values, which means fish landing values, which increase for significantly, economically significant species over time. So that is when they are alive. But when they are dead, we can think, okay, we are just causing, degradation of ecosystem and they die off. But that's not all. What actually happens is their death can trigger regime shifts. Okay, so there is a specific ratio in which carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, C and P ratios are maintained across different ecosystems. In the aquatic ecosystems also, there is a specific ratio of 106 to 16:1. And if seagrasses environments are present, they adequately contribute to this stoichiometric balance. But if they die in whole, there it causes regime shifts and loss of the regenerative capacities of sediments to regenerate these nutrients. So there, because of the biochemical reactions and the biogeochemical pathways involved, there is an immediate release of methane in local scales at a very, very, very strong pattern, because when they are dead, it is not just the sediment that releases the methane, but it is also the seagrass environments themselves. So there is a combined release of methane, which can have a stronger effect on the climate than just carbon dioxide emissions. And also, to go with it, when they are dead, of course, we know that we will be losing out on the economically important species and hence loss of livelihoods. Now, what causes seagrass die-offs in India's coastal ecosystems is not very well studied. We now understood that there is an important aspect of the ecosystem, marine ecosystem, the seagrasses. But what happens in India's coastal ecosystems is that what is known to us, for example, is the impact of disturbances from motorized boats, or the disturbance from the deployment of the nets, or overfishing in the seagrass beds. They actually sort of cause the major impacts to the seagrass ecosystem by which they die off. What we know at a much lesser level is that there are specific pathways through which ocean acidification can actually make these seagrass ecosystems die, and that actually is attributed to the low pH. That comes from the runoffs, that comes from the acid rain and the ocean acidification per se. This also at sometimes can trigger algal blooms, and also the impact of larger trawlers and boats, which cause choking of lagoon systems, where these are microtidal environments and they stay the microtidal limits, like the water limits. So the tidal influence is some factor which is not very well understood, but we have to also account for it for the die-off conditions. Okay, so these are some things that we know of or recognize, but there are some factors which are not well recognized. For example, seagrass wasting disease, which is caused by a protist. Here again, there is a link between plant and animal biologies, where this sort of understanding is very critical for us to safeguard India's coastal and marine ecosystems. And negative feedbacks from the geochemistry and the biogeochemistry, these can also cause methane emissions, as we spoke of. How? Let us see. That seagrasses regulate the climate. Now, for example, if you take a typical seagrass environment, the tissues of the seagrass act as straws for methane. Okay, so when they are present, methane that is there is ejected into the tissues from the sediments and the seabed, and they actually have a feedback control on the release because they are capturing it now. And they will respond whenever there is a high salinity or a low salinity or a change back in the salinity angle. The seagrass ecosystems respond by slowly releasing these compounds, methylated compounds, which are actually transformed biochemically within their system. This actually is done by what are known as methanogenic archaea, which use the methylated compounds. And now you see there is a feedback control on the methane, release of methane, which acts as per the feedback control on the salinity changes and results through the feedback control of micropopulation to slow and sustained releases. So it's a very gentle and a very a sensitive system. And here you see the release of cumulative methane to atmosphere is decreased as much as possible by the presence of seagrasses. If you will recall the earlier slide where I say when they are dead, they cause more problems, you will now appreciate why they have to be alive, right? So the long-term impacts are not just in local, but also regional and national level. But at short terms, they are definitely very high intense, hyperlocal effects, which will cause the death of nurseries. So which means to lose seagrasses means to lose the functionality of fishing itself. So here is a small note for biologists and biotechnologists who study plants. Now, there is an accepted worldview that I've listed here. There are 4 such views. First view says that seagrasses, there are different populations and families, and they are not very well, there's no danger to different populations and families of seagrasses. They are well positioned. And they are situated in naturally undisturbed environments which can support huge populations. Both are not correct. Let us examine why. And there or further, plant biologists will tell only the land environment can support the largest spread of clonal tree species. Example is the Pando, where it is an ecosystem by itself, where there are about 40,000 aspen trees, which is situated in a place called Utah in the USA. And they are all clones of one single organism and share the same root system. So this is the largest spread of tree species which is known on the world. And finally, one aspect called diploidy, which provides several evolutionary advantages in trait selection, is very advantageous to plants also. So these are 4 different views. Now let us see what new developments reveal. Science has shown very recently that there exists what are known as Posidonia australis, which is the largest plant in Shark Bay of the southwestern coast, Australian coast, which shows that one genetically identical individual can be spread for about 180 square kilometers. And it's not just that, it is 8,500 years old. So now what we are looking at is 8,500 years old of history of seagrasses, which have actually helped segregation of carbon in the sediments, which have segregated methane over a long time. They have regulated primarily the largest scale of methane regulation possible in the world, and they have existed over different very harsh conditions, exposed to natural hazards such as cyclones and heat waves. So here you see polyploidy and not just diploidy is beneficial for an organism called Posidonia australis. So showing that plants are very versatile and they are very, very resilient. And their presence actually offers resilience to the coastal and the marine environment which they inhabit. So the preservation of the genetic traits which are revealed through multiproxy assessment shows their equal resilience to both biotic and abiotic factors. So it is not acceptable now that seagrasses are just present in naturally undisturbed environment, and they are across different population and families. But even if they are present as one family, they offer the maximum coastal resilience as possible. And this is Posidonia australis we were talking about. You can see a picture of it on your screens. It covers hundreds of square kilometers and making it the largest known organism by area in the world. This is something very beautiful to ponder about, because it is very important for us now to understand from resilience perspectives three ways in which they contribute. One is resilience to salinity changes. In an earlier slide, we saw how salinity changes, feedback from salinity changes, the seagrass system regulates that also. It regulates methane release also, and it regulates the biodiversity also through the methylated compounds that are taken up by the archaea. So here you see salinity changes in the coastal ecosystem are very crucial to maintain the brackish water characteristics, or also feed across land to ocean exchanges. This is a very, very crucial factor. And seagrass ecosystems are very also important because they control the stoichiometric releases of overall methane stocks in coordination with the mangrove and estuarine environments, and they indirectly preserve the massive methane contributions to the atmosphere, which can happen if they are not alive. So these three aspects not only contribute to the resilience we were talking about, but also eco-restorative mechanisms. Earlier, I mentioned this decade as a UN decade of restoration. So imparting resilience is one part, and imparting eco-restoration through which resilience increases or multiplies is the other part. And as you can see, seagrasses are at the very root of it. Some part of our work is going on in this angle by assessing how seagrass beds nurture the economic value of coastal ecosystems for India. And I concentrate at a very special place called Pulikat Lagoon or Parver Kadu, which you all may be aware of. It is present, is situated in the northernmost part of Tamil Nadu, very close to Chennai. It's even called the urban backyard lagoon of Chennai, because it's fast growing, but fast urbanization and industrialization are also threatening the way Pulikat is existing. And here you can see that seagrass beds are very much a part of the Pulikat multi-environmental ecosystem, and habitat fragmentation of seagrass system is triggering the way in which the fishery resources are originating from this very space. Here you see the cycling of nutrients, nurturing of the economic value of the ecosystems, and also controlling habitat fragmentation become a very key aspect of the framework that we are defining. And we are trying to see this in terms of not just the fragmentation and suitability, but also in terms of what is known as maximum sustainable yields of fisheries. Now, when we talked about fisheries, we have to actually talk about what are the various ways in which fisheries can impact ecosystems as a whole. And one way, through the presence of trawlers or boats which actually hamper the seagrass ecosystems, they have a major influence or impact on the seagrass environment. But this is not emphasized even in the national policy on marine fisheries, which actually emphasizes the importance of seagrasses along two other major ecosystems, the mangroves and coral reefs. We are very well aware of mangroves and coral reefs. It has been in a lot of discussion worldwide, and especially in India. And in recent times, there is again a push which actually has focused or spotlighted mangrove conservation largely. So is the coral reef habitat that we know. But as seagrasses are a very small part of the entire coastal ecosystems that we see, they are actually missed. But recognizing the high range of ecosystem services that they offer, it is very important for us to list them as ecologically sensitive areas. They are actually listed under the CRZ notification 2011, but no exclusive policies are available right now for long-term monitoring or management of these ecosystems. Now I'm bringing this problem to the forefront because as scientists we accept, till now we have seen the importance of seagrasses, how not only from an ecological and a stoichiometric and economic point of view they are important, but they're also very important to impart eco-resilience and for eco-restoration. So when they're giving, offering so many preservative, aspects or conservative aspects for human beings, we have a parallel concept on land which is called as sacred groves. Okay, so these are areas within forests which are very sacred to communities, which actually have a religious or a spiritual inclination to conserve those regions. Can't we not emulate the same in the sea or the ocean or the coast and call seagrass meadows as sacred groves? This is something which we can push forth from a policy objective. And this is something new that I'm discussing with all of you today, because if we practice this, we will be able to attach a lot of conservational value to seagrasses. So now when we are talking about such conservational aspects, that can lead to the transformational spaces in terms of imparting eco-resilience. Here, actually assessment of their vulnerability, assessing the natural capital, identifying the ecological processes which can actually deal with the anthropogenic aspect of it, and also using simple metrics to monitor them, also using what are known as NBS or nature-based solutions to conserve them. These aspects all should go together if we want to synthesize a transformational policy space to conserve seagrasses. Now we'll see it is not so easy that we as scientists or social scientists, we can each say we will only contribute from our own domains, right? Both have to come together, because to promote scientific investigation is also to promote eco-restorative advancements. To promote technology is also in a way to study what are the indigenous and traditional knowledge systems that are available to us to promote the participatory models for eco-restoration. And not only that, integrating them with scientific technologies of today, like the geospatial technologies. We all are well able to use GPS on our phones. We are well able to use Google Maps and other navigational modes. We have to also start using them for conservation. And here is where remote sensing can help to monitor changes in the climate and link it with how the ecosystem is actually functioning. So now we move on as to take off from our discussion on technology, as to look at how some specific technologies can be used as a means to build resilience. Now, when we look at climate policy, now why we started off with this technology aspect to it, and just to make you understand, there was a big discussion that happened in the first half of 2022 based on the environmental performance index, which was not actually accepted. Okay, so what happened is there was a push to introduce climate policy as a new policy objective in 2022, because climate change issue was a very, very vital issue, and as part of what are known as ecosystem vitality objectives, their weight was considered as 24% in the last index. Okay, that was without having a strong policy aspect associated with it. But with the policy objective added to it, it becomes 38%. And India was assigned a rank of 165 for this very specific objective versus the 106 earlier. So now we can ask, why did we actually slip down in the ranks? Okay, so what was told to us was the improvement in the tree cover loss and the wetland loss categories is not linked to the projected emissions trajectory. So what happens when this happens? Our environmental performance index drops down from 106 to 165. But what we are being told is you have not accounted for tree cover loss and you have not accounted for wetland losses. Okay, but these projected emission trajectories are in contrast to the nationally determined contribution. Why do I say contrast? Because both forests and wetlands are crucial carbon sinks, and these were not reflected in the projected emissions, which means that we could be doing more than we knew. Now, when we consider or apply this to the coastal scenario and the marine environment, we will be appalled to know that the same carbon value is assigned to all the categories of non-forest natural lands, where seagrass environments, mangrove environments are also part of. So what is the contribution? If you see, mangroves and seagrasses contribute excessively to carbon sequestration and very much strong background to determining the nationally determined contributions, but they were ignored. When this happens, the rank slipping from 106 to 165 is no big deal. Okay, so this we understand. And Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change gave a rebuttal to the performance environmental performance index, which was recently published in 2022, and said that you have to consider the value of our forests, wetlands, mangroves, and seagrasses. Okay, under this category. In fact, a report of 2020 of the Government of India stated that the fish stock status and fish caught by trawling negatively correlate with policy objective of the Economic Vitality Index. But they positively correlated with this issue, which means that already there was a recognition, but it was not enough. It was maintained that we were not actually linking the stock statuses and the overfishing statuses or the operation of these boats, different types of boats, with the policy aspect, and hence the refinement of indicators was suggested. But does this indicate to us there is a lack of evidence to trust or mistrust the links between climate change and its impacts? Absolutely not, because there is a lot of work that is going on in the technology aspect of the fisheries sector, which actually promote science as speak truth to power, rather than just business as usual model, which considers only stock of fishes or how much of boats are operating and that kind of thing. But now we are not looking just at the larger profits, but we are looking at the conservation aspects also, where a business as usual model will say we don't assume or associate much value to low or no conservation statuses or high climate change impacts. For us to bring in large profits from the fisheries sector is important, but use of scientifically aided technologies will actually indicate to us that more investment cycles are necessary if we have to guarantee that ecosystems such as seagrasses, mangroves, coral reefs help us to sequester the carbon at a larger scale and help prevent climate related disasters. So here it is not just the recent or the new technologies that can help us, but more traditional and indigenous technologies can also help us to assess what is the recurrence of the natural capital losses, because here the ecosystems are not by themselves. They are actually, as I mentioned earlier, subject to anthropogenic and natural disasters. So we have to account for both. Only then we can complete what is known as the sustainability cycle on a long-term basis. So now if we consider the time dependency angle also, we can consider, for example, let us take two SDG goals, SDG 2, which deals with nutrition, and SDG 14, which deals with life below water. Both are interlinked. On land, we can say if there are 4 different policy aspects which we can consider. On land, for example, we can say if there is a food shortage, let us increase the use of aquaculture to alleviate this food shortage, and so we have short-term gains on the nutrition aspect. Okay, now another policy says if there is a food shortage, let us increase the use of local varieties of crops, and this will have long term gains. So on land, it is possible for us to consider either a short term option or a long term option. But if we look at policy 3 and 4, which pertain to the aquatic domain, one policy says if there is low fish yield, let us increase mechanized crafts so that we will have short-term gains, because mechanized crafts, as you know, are the big ships which operate. They can actually get back a huge yield to the land and the people, and which actually bring in more income. So let us increase that activity. Policy 4 but says if there is a low fish yield, let us increase stock diversification of the fishes so that we will end up with long-term gains. If you see policy 1 and 2, they can act together to some extent. But if you see policy 3 and 4, they are actually contradicting each other. Right? So the time dependency factor actually is very important part to be considered when we are making a science-based suggestion to tackle climate change, as well as what is the societal aspects of malnutrition and poor economic statuses in our country right now. So we also have to consider the turnover rates for each of these ecosystems if we have to make very strong policy impact. Now, we may not actually agree with policy 3 because we all know that it has a negative correlation with the environmental or the ecosystem restorative operations that we are taking forth. So we actually took this concept and studied the scenario at Odisha. Odisha coast, as you know, is a very, very biodiverse rich coast, but at the same time, it is the most vulnerable to natural disasters, especially flooding due to cyclonic activities. So there we went and we went to these places. This graph shows you places like Talsari, Udaipur, Hanskara, Panchubisa. We went to these places which are known as fish landing centers. And when we saw that the distribution of mechanized, motorized, and non-motorized fishers, they were different at different places. And you see, although the mechanized fishing was very, very small, they were increasing over time. The contributions of mechanized and motorized boats to climate change is very, very crucial thing for us to assess, because they are the source through their operation by consuming fuel and letting emissions as sources of carbon dioxide from the ocean. Okay, we are talking about carbon dioxide emissions from land and we know the different sources, but it's very difficult for us to accept how these emissions will actually turn out from the marine environment. And here is where we actually took the help of a modeling approach called CMIP5, where we have compared what would be the carbon dioxide emissions, actually what was, what is, and what would be if there were two scenarios. One scenario was the RCP 4.5, which is the present scenario, how we are managing our oceans with minimal management measures and mitigation policies. We saw policy 3 and 4. Those are the kind of mitigation policies we are thinking of. But what would happen if the emissions increased and there was no management at all? So here we considered two time scales to do this work. We took the past decade, that is 2011 to 2020, and analyzed the differences in emissions. Now, if you see for 4.5, considering a 4.5 scenario with minimal or moderate management strategies, the order of the change in the emissions was very less, right? So the differences, if you see on the other hand, for 8.5 will be of the order of 4 ppmv, which is ppm by volume, which is very, very huge. And it is going to be for all places across Odisha coast. Similarly, then we saw, okay, let us take the 2020 year, because it's a very interesting year. It is a corona year. There were many ships which were not operated during that time. So what happens then? Now, when we projected both these scenarios, we still see that it will be a very insignificant way to deal with this situation if we had even moderate management or co-adaptation strategies as were present now, contributing to very less population of mechanized crafts compared to motorized or non-motorized. But if they increased, if the number of motorized increased and there was very less management options available to us, as in represented by the RCP 8.5, the order or magnitude of change will be huge. It will still be about 4 ppmb. Now, what happens in future? Okay, so in 2021, no, 2020, you saw this, and if you see 2021, it is alarming because when the during the Corona time, when the boats were not in operation, this can have been the condition. But without any management operations, by 2021, the order had jumped from 4 to 7. Right? This scenario tells us that going forward, we will still see that there will be a huge change in the emission strategy from now to the future if we don't actually consider co-adaptation strategies at the core of our marine planning. So the resilience aspect will become low. Restorative activities can decrease if the management activities are not actually enabled in future, and this can actually project to an order of 7 ppmb. Now we actually looked at even mangrove regions across Odisha. We earlier spoke about seagrass systems, but there are extensive mangrove systems in Odisha, as you know, and we surveyed the river mouths where they are present. And these areas are actually designated as ecologically sensitive areas or restricted areas of fishing. But you can see in this photo, fishing boats still operate there, right? And local fishers reported that fish aggregation of fish stocks had decreased in these river mouths over time due to the influx of industrial effluents. Now, when we went back to our data, and we saw if we use fishing advisories or marine fishing advisories, as they are called, which are advisories which are given to the fishers free of cost, telling them where they can find fishes in the sea. If they use that locations using the GPS and travel to that location and come back, the number of trips that they used to go and the search radius that they used to search will decrease. And this can actually help in an annual reduction to the tune of 220,000 plus tons per year. And this is massive, which means that geospatial technology can be a very important way how we can look at bringing more resilience to the coastal communities, not just for the fish, but also for human beings. Now, if we look at the third example, here let us look at coastal land degradation and restoration. Now, if we know land degradation is something that we associated with the terrestrial aspect, but coastal land degradation also exists, and most of the very rich and fertile regions where food crops are grown are present in the coastal regions. So if you see land degradation leads to reduced land productivity, disturbs the flow of ecosystem services, and impairs the economic conditions. And an issue of coastal land degradation has been put forth very strongly by IPCC, which said that in cyclone prone areas, the combination of sea level rise and more intense cyclones will cause land degradation with serious consequences for peoples and livelihoods. And this is a very direct estimate of how climate change can actually affect people living on the coast. Chennai, as we know, it is actually a very, very good example of how climate change can affect the coastal city, a mega city. It can, lots of people even project that it can be flooded completely and can disappear off the radar. And being from Chennai as I am, I think we are all equally, anxious to see that it does not happen. So here, actually, the topic of coastal land degradation is not very well discussed. Although the India's opportunities to address this coastal land degradation is huge. And that is because India committed to restore about 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2020 as part of what was known as the Delhi Declaration of climate change aspect. This was a very well validated and very good exercise that was actually communicated by the Press Bureau of India in 2019. India also committed to create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalents. And apart from this, an additional forest and tree cover by 2030 under nationally determined contributions. But here again, forest and tree cover may or may not explicitly include mangrove cover. Let us see how India has dealt with this particular challenge a little later. So, to attain what is known as sustainability, eco-resilience, and eco-restoration, these are the three concepts that we have been talking about. These will contribute to achieving land degradation neutrality also, or preserving coastal land degradation to minimum, right? So these are linked to resilience and they are linked to development through the closing loop of sustainability. And what can help us to grow this into what we can achieve are two aspects. The key considerables that are given here. One is to consolidate the knowledge base of the issue by bringing in as many environmentalists, ecosystem specialists, botanists, zoologists, and all scientific domains together. And second is to grow the science policy innovative policies, which can actually organically foster the sustainability mindset first. Now, three examples are already available globally to tell us that this is possible when we look at not the land as a separate part from the sea, but as a part of the land sea continuum itself. Because when we see, there was a river, the Colorado River, which goes from the United States into Mexico. If you see this river, Mexico is at downstream, right? And this receives maximum pollution as much as is possible, and being more polluted than the upstream regions, the flow is divided among 8 states where more water allocation is required than what it carries. Over time, due to extraction, there was no flow in the delta, and that actually caused a decrease in the agricultural productivities in the coastal zone as well as the fish productivities on the other side of the sea. Because a mixing of the fresh water with seawater is very, very important. At this juncture is where more ecologically sensitive environments like mangroves, seagrasses, coral reefs exist. So when there is no flow, not only agriculture but also the other environments were disturbed. So what they did was they actually inculcated agricultural drainage canal systems which are sustaining what was known as a desert wetland earlier. Today it has become a very fertile wetland environment, as you can see in this picture. Similar example is from the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia, where the success of restoring flows across the wetlands actually brought back the productivity of this whole region. You can see the dark shaded region here in the bottom in Australia's map. This whole region was revived and eco-restored, and resilience of the coastal zones increased. So these are global examples. One very special example, I have already talked about Pulicat with you. There are other lakes along the coasts of the world, such as this particular lake, Xochimilco Lake in central Mexico. It is an endoaeric basin, which means that there is no connectivity with adjacent system. It's an isolated system, which has, earlier it used to be connected to the sea. Now it is isolated. Here you can see two types of water environments exist, the fresh water and the brackish water. The indigenous or the traditional knowledge systems which we have been talking about, they pertain to the age of the Aztecs. Aztecs completely used what are known as causeways built by natural materials to divide these two parts of the lake, which had become brackish or saltish if they are not managed properly. Even in such harsh conditions, they were able to divide the lake into two and utilize some portions of the lake to have floating islands where they did agriculture. These were known as chinampas. So this is an example of how coastal land reclamation can be benefited by using technologies, ancient technologies, which have illustrated how well actually coastal lagoon systems of today can be maintained using the same principle of earlier, to also tell us that these can be means or policies for effective water energy food nexus. Now here I'm showing you, after showing you Xochimilco, the exact studies that we have done on the Pulicat Lake ecosystem. Pulicat Lake, again, there is a limit of tidal influence if you see, beyond which it operates in a different way. The southern portion you see is more saltier than the other portions, and the western portion, it has more freshwater inputs compared to the eastern portion. Eastern portion, if you see, near Sriharikota Island. You all recognize this probably. That is the most hypersaline part of the lake, and next to it is the least saline part of the lake. So there is a beautiful way in which salinity variations are in operation over time, but these are lost if actually they are restricted by choking of the entrances. And this actually suggests that the intermittently open and closed lagoon systems are actually can be benefited if we apply the Xochimilco concept to this lake. Now, when we studied the lake ecosystem post 2015 Chennai flood event, we found that 40% desalination had been affected, which means so much of rains were able to desalinate the lake to an extent that if you see in the years where 2007, if you see, it had become hypersaline, it had actually diluted very well in 2015 post this monsoon. So there is a natural management aspect to it where eco restoration and coastal resilient of a wetland ecosystem is possible, and it actually is happening in front of our eyes. And we have to recognize that as the scientists and biologists, we can have indicators or proxies to know how this has happened. And at the core of this Pulicat story is an organism called Bidelphia. We also took actually samples of the sediment and water, and we studied it. When we saw it, we were very astonished to see that during the 2015 flood event, many actually genera of organisms had died out. Being a person who studies phytoplankton and algae, I was very interested in the composition of algae post in the aftermath of 2015, and I could not find any other organism except for Bidelphia in the samples, which meant that not all is lost. We can think that during the flooding, the brackish water species are completely wiped out. There's nothing left to the ecosystem. How to revive it? But there are organisms which are very resilient, and they, because of their presence, will drive the biogeochemistry back to normal. And those are all the bio engines that we are talking about. Bidelphia was a very particular part of this ecosystem, which actually associated with the macrophytes so well that the circulations returned and it became, the natural brackishness was restored in about 2 months' time. So now you see, apart from what is a natural operation, the challenges are more from the anthropogenic aspect, right? Excessive shell mining, excessive aquaculture, release of thermal water into the Ennur Creek. All these are aspects which are actually decreasing the effective way or the magnitude in which effective eco restoration can be resumed for Pulicat Lagoon. If we have to target something, it is the tripartite problem. One is ecological in nature, one is environmental nature, and the other social in nature. So ecological activities now coming together, bringing together the concept of ecosystem as in the seagrass, the technology and boat operation as in the example of overfishing in Odisha, as well as the environmental aspect of multi-environmentalism as we have seen in Pulicat, we can say that there is the ecological answer to addressing loss of fragmentation of habitats through good policy making. Similarly, the environmental aspects of overland flooding and desalination and loss of intertidal lands can also be achieved through good science. And finally, all this actually can help to improve the livelihoods for the people who inhabit the coastal zones. So now we have with us equally important three goals: the social goal, the environmental goal, and the ecological goal, which actually benefits by improving the eco-resilience of the coastal regions itself. And how we do it is through different assessments or types of assessment. One needs to be a focal point analysis, which targets the exact focal point of where the problems begin. Another is to connect it with the different distal networks and try and find out through interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary dialogues how we can find solutions. So it also has to be national and transformational, so that we can't say that land degradation neutrality is not something that applies to mangroves or other seagrass ecosystems. It also concerns coastal land degradation in a very, very serious way, and how this will contribute to the overall climate adaptation. So now we come to the recent efforts of the government of India in the budget that was recently released, the 2023 budget. An effort called as MISHTI was introduced by Government of India. MISHTI stands for Mangrove Initiative for Shoreline Habitats and Tangible Incomes. It's a very, very powerful way to represent to the world. You will recall the earlier debate that we had on environmental performance indices. This is India's answer to the world to say, yes, we are taking stock of everything. We are bringing in the mangroves, we are bringing in, the value of these mangroves that add to the overall climate change scenario of how we are adapting to it and developing the coastal resilience. That is a very unique way to say that mangrove plantation along the coastline and salt pan lands will help in the convergence of national programs such as the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employability Guarantee Scheme, or MGNREGS, and the Campa Fund and other sources, which help to create the assets along coastal zones to maintain the natural environment, its pristineness of the natural environment. But what needs to go is the current, the trend of urban neo-environmentalism, which says everything green is good. We are pro-green. We really like to promote activities which are green. Example is ecotourism, which, yes, is a big push towards, assuming activities which actually help to save the environment, but at the same time equally pollute it. That aspect has to be taken into consideration very, very keenly. Now, what I like about Adayar Punga is that the footfall that the Punga was designed for is very, very less. And you recognize Adayar Punga as a major coastal resilience project in Tamil Nadu in recent times, which aptly says we will not allow visitors all days in the week, right? And we will not allow them to litter whatever we have restored. This is a powerful way. And this is a powerful way to plan ecological tourism with the benefits of actual environmental preservation. That is very important. When it becomes adaptable greenwashing is when there is more economic angle associated with it through industrialization or push for more urbanization. And then it becomes the developmental ethic is lost, as is the preservation ethic as well as the conservation ethic. So our idea through, as to plan how to actually sustainably use these resources will address the policy gaps which go with thinking that all activities are not green, and we have to understand what each activity will lead to. So what we can do together then is first to be aware of ecosystem threats. We have to have the idea of red list of ecosystems. We know red list of species. Those are, listing of species which are endangered or rare or extinct. But now the concept spills over to IUCN's red list of ecosystems, which helps us to bring awareness to the status of ecosystem itself. Is it vulnerable? Or is it going to be degraded? Or can it be restored? Can it be made resilient? And while this awareness builds on to adaptation scenario, it will help us to adopt the right measures to conserve and preserve these systems. Here is where the science policy angle becomes very, very strong, so that we can remain committed to the sustainable development goals which are applicable to the seas, through assuring that not only the people but also the ecosystem health becomes very, very important to us. So the enablement actually happens also through the technology focus of the whole thing. First, having barriers at nexus zone, which will help us. We saw the chinampas, as an effective product of the ideas or innovative technologies that was used in ancient civilization. So barriers at nexus zones will help not only to control land degradation but also improve the resilience to climate. So these sort of nature-based solutions are actually available to us, but we have to select which is most important to us, because natural NBS versus engineered coastal defense structures will always have a difference. Natural NBS gives a long-term commitment to sustainability, and this can actually increase or decrease over time, adapting themselves to the status of the ecosystem itself. This particular photograph was very attractive to me, because in this photo you see, it's a 2009 old photo of 2009. The Maldivian Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture, he is signing a document which asked everybody to cut down the carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, this happened at a place called Girifushi in Maldives, where the government was holding an international conference to combat climate change. Here, actually, the whole meeting was held underwater. You can see the scuba diving equipment that all the other important ministers are wearing. This was to bring awareness to the fact that climate change can trigger small island nations such as Maldives to become climate refugees if it is not dealt with because of the flooding. At Chennai, Chennai, Mumbai, and all the important, economically important cities in the country, we also face similar threat, and it is up to us to recognize this threat and take up climate change and resilience at the forefront, and coastal resilience to help us strengthen our ecosystems and people together. So at this juncture, I'd like to thank my students, Sudeep Kumar Kundu, and my external master student from Bangalore University, Shali Krishna, for all the brilliant discussions, data analysis, and the approaches that we have had. I'd like to thank INCOIS and MOES for awareness about the geospatial technologies and how they can be used to restore ecosystems. And of course, my parent organization, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Bangalore, for helping me to be a part of this talk today and encouraging me to put my views as well as our work out in front of you today. We all recognize oceans separately, water separately, rivers separately, but we should know that all are part of one big hydrological cycle or the water cycle. It can be broken, but every river, every wetland, every city, and every farm can contribute to fixing this to the right way, and we as people can choose to write a new water story. I'd like to leave you with this thought. Thank you for listening all this time very patiently. It's about an hour's time, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk with you all.
Thank you, Dr. Harini Santhanam. It was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. After this, certificate. The platform is open to second MSc. Anybody else? First MSc. Third BSc. Second BSc. And first BSc. You all said yes yesterday.
So in case everybody is thinking about, different aspects of what you heard today, please take your time. I'd be happy also to get back to you. If you can email me, I'll be happy to, get back to you. I think somebody has a question here.
Okay. It's very nice.
Yes, please go on. Haran.
Yes, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. Hi, ma'am.
Hello.
Ma'am, and how to save sea grasses, ma'am? Your methodology. Please tell about it.
Yes, so that's what I told you. This needs a policy perspective. How to conserve seagrasses, right? Its
Yes, ma'am.
first thing is recognition of their value as ecosystems. Do we have a figure? Always we say only when there is a figure, economic figure attached to something, then people take it seriously. That is where the concept of ecosystems valuation or ecosystems assessment becomes very important. Do we have a figure on how ecosystems contribute economically, as well as, let us say, the number from the NDC or the nationally determined contributions angle, or let us say the impact that they have as for giving the habitats for human beings also. So in different ways, if we have valuation, we can actually enforce a big channel how we can propose collateral channels to conserve seagrasses. One thing I will say, one aspect that government has taken up as to ensure that mangroves, Mishti, as we saw, a similar program has to come for seagrasses. That is the very, very important angle that we can look at. Second angle we can look at is, let us understand what is ailing seagrasses from more a scientific point of view. Is there a seagrass wasting disease in India? Does it affect, or is it only the anthropogenic factors that are affecting the seagrasses? This sort of data becomes also very, very pertinent for us. Based on these two aspects, we can actually formulate policies, either how to actually restore them. Should we put in more of our efforts on reducing pollution, or should we concentrate on more of seagrass aiding nature based solutions? So these, where should we invest the money? This is what the government looks for. And as researchers, as scientists, it is our duty to tell the government, see, look at this angle, this becomes very important. That is one way. A third way is actually to promote what I called as sacred groves. Can seagrasses be sacred groves? Can we consider them as sacred groves? That is a people's perspective, and it can be very, very influential while making policy changes. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a doubt, Dr. Harini.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible to have sacred groves in an aquatic environment?
That is what I'm talking about, ma'am. Maybe not literally as in that we have on land, but can we designate it as a sacred grove? Because there is a lot of spiritual and religious value associated with sacred groves. People, if we just say don't go near seagrass systems, no boating activities should be stopped because they are ecologically sensitive areas, they might not listen to it. That because that is the most productive center. That is where they get most prawns. That is where they can have catch more landed values. But if we say they are sacred groves, they can only be accessed during this time. This is how you should look at it. Probably that will be a viewpoint that will be acceptable by the local people basically, and they will be transmitted to the tourists who come to that place, because tourists don't mind. They will come, they want to see all the beautiful spots, they will pollute and go. They say we are paying for what we are watching, but is that hardly enough for for us to safeguard the environment? That's why I started with environmental safety at core. When we look at the technogenic concept and biogenic concept, one thing that fails is how humans actually value ecosystems. They value it differentially. So to just bring this into focus, if we say, during a ecotourism tour, this is a sacred, we consider seagrasses as sacred groves, littering may be little less. So that that's just an innovative way to think about it.
Thank you.
Yes, please. I think there's another question.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm telling.
Yes.
Ma'am, overfishing and plastic, how to affect the seagrasses? Please tell me.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Ma'am, overfishing and plastic, how to affect the seagrasses? Overfishing and plastic.
Overfishing. Okay.
Yes.
Overfishing, actually, see, most seagrass environments are accessed by motorboats. When motorboats actually go near the seagrass ecosystems, they spoil the sandy bed. When they spoil the substratum, the sandy shoals, the substratum for seagrass environments to actually attach themselves to and flourish becomes less. More of sand shoal circulation disturbs the seagrass environments. That is number one. For fishing boats, they actually access those locations where more fish shoals are located, and seagrass environments are one such environment. So if they actually more of boats venture into the seagrass meadows, there is going to be overfishing, and that will actually affect by the presence of the fishing crafts and the deployment of the nets, which will choke the seagrasses. They will affect it. So the second factor, what did you want to know?
Ma'am, plastics, ma'am.
Plastics. Yes. So plastics actually are a very, very important consideration that we have to have. Although, see, microplastics, marine debris and litter, these constitute the worst way in which human impacts are manifested onto the coastal zone. So their presence will choke the fishes which live in the seagrass ecosystems. Seagrass ecosystems have a feedback with fish population. It's not just the fishes, prawns, they release some substances which actually the seagrasses use to flourish. Okay, so this is a biochemical and a biogeochemical pathway that is manifested there through nutrient cycling that will get affected due to the presence of marine debris. This is a very well reported phenomenon all around the globe. It can originate from somewhere, but it will lie and affect the seagrass environments elsewhere. So this is one way. Another way is how microplastics are stored in the sediment itself. Over the years, this will definitely cause the death and the wiping out of the seagrass systems, because they are, although very, very resilient organisms for natural and disturbances, these sort of human-made disturbances is too much of a load for them. When we consider the ecosystem loading, this will be above the ecosystem load that a seagrass environment can take. But it is not to say that they won't be resilient. It can take a longer time for eco restoration to happen.
On behalf of the Department of Plant Biology and Plant Biotechnology, I wholeheartedly thank the resource person of today's national webinar, Dr. Harini Santhanam, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of Public Policy, MAHE, Bangalore, for an informative, elaborate, and data-packed lecture on need for climate resilience, which can be achieved by adopting co-management policies, environment safety measures, especially in the coastal areas, and efforts like a MISTI. Thank you, Dr. Harini, for sparing your valuable time.
Thank you you so
also
much.
extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Indu K. Murthy, Sector Head, Climate, Environment and Sustainability, Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, Bangalore, to bring the speaker for today's webinar. My thanks are due to Dr. D.B. Usharani, Principal in charge, for the support and encouragement for the webinar. My heartfelt thanks are due to Dr. T. Ushapriya, Vice Principal Self-Supporting, for the support and wish. I thank wholeheartedly our HOD ma'am, Mrs. V. Manimuri, for organizing this webinar, which will be beneficial especially for the student community. I sincerely thank the executive members, Dr. M. Kanimuri, Assistant Professor, and Dr. S. Evelyn Priya, Assistant Professor of our department, for conducting the webinar meticulously. I also thank the faculty members of our department for their support and help in the conduction of the webinar.
A special thank you to our faculty, Dr. E. Punita, Assistant Professor, for the help she extended in the preparation of certificate. I also thank Ms. C. Rajalakshmi and K. Kalyani for designing the invitation and certificate. I thank very much the system administrator, Ms. Kavita, for the technical assistant of the day. I extend my thanks to our department supporting staff for their help. Finally, I thank all the participants across the state for attending this webinar. Thank you all.
My sincere thanks to Dr. T. Maithili, Associate Professor and Head, Self-Supporting Team, in extending all her help to organize this program. Thank you, Maithili.
I wish to thank
you,
all
Ananda.
the wonderful faculty members.
The feedback form will be posted in the chat box. Kindly all of you fill up the feedback form so that you will receive your certificate as soon as you fill up the feedback form. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harini.
Thank you, Dr. Manimuri. I think a very warm, thanks to everybody here, and also Dr. Indu, who introduced me to you. And last time I participated as a participant here, and I could see the energy that the whole platform brings forth. And this time also, you have created such a wonderful platform. My best of luck for this to happen each year and every year, and to all the students here.
Convey my regards to Dr. Indu. Morning, I tried to contact her. I was not able to talk to her. Actually, I wanted her also to join this program, but I couldn't get the line. Did you inform her, Harini?
Yes, I shared the announcement. She may have been in another meeting, I think.
Okay.
So probably she was not able to make it.
Convey my regards to her.
Sure.
And your friends and family members also.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for giving a fantastic presentation to all my students, Harini. And in future also, we would like to have you through offline number.
Most definitely. My pleasure to have been here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes. Meet you again sometime later.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Anything to convey? Okay, LRB in Feds. Any letter mail.